Good evening, North American Division Master Guide. This is Gloria Martexera, your host for the evening. And with me, I have Esther Reyna, Malika Sharp, Tom Dombrowski, Argelis Almonte, and Pastor Grady. Tonight we will be discussing the Crisis Intervention Honor. This honor has been geared towards leaders. The goal is to help you guys have better awareness and understanding when the children and the youth that you're working with are going through a different crisis. And for starters, we will start defining the word crisis itself. And we can say that it's an emotional, significant event, something that it's unstable, or something that is of a crucial time in the life of an individual. Now, crisis comes in different forms for every individual, and Esther will talk to us about the different types of crises that people can endure as we move along.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So we have three different type of crisis that we want to define. And the first one is developmental crisis, which is a disruption of process of development. Also, we have situational crisis in which something unexpectedly happens, such as a natural disaster or an accident. Also, we have existential crises, which are the inner conflicts related to things such as life purposes, midlife crisis, divorces, direction, and spirituality, or job loss. Within those, we have three elements that needs to be present in order to be considered a crisis. And the first one is that the situation has to be very stressful. The second one is that there needs to be time for their intervention. And thirdly, there is a period in which the individual is having a hard time to coping with his situation, but is able to cope later on. The first example I want to name, so we can see how these three elements are present, is talking about Maria Magdalene. We can find her story in John 8, 1 through 11. And the crisis was a death penalty. And what happened to her? So the first thing that we see in this story is that she was caught in adultery. And we know that when you were caught in adultery, the two parties that committed the sin needed to appear in front of the Senate. But she was the only one that was brought up to Jesus because he called himself a master. So they made her stand in front of the group of men by herself. So imagine being there. That's a crisis. She was probably stressed. Her anxiety went off the roof. I'm pretty sure of that. And remember that the penalty was to die by stone. But we can see how Christ started the intervention, and he started to write on the sand. Many people said different things about what he was writing, but what we know is that when he was all said and done, no stone was thrown at her. And then Jesus asked her, "Where are your accusers?" And she said, "No one has accused me." And he said, "You can go freely." And that's it. So we can see the intervention here by God. He took the time. Yes, she was not listened, but I'm pretty sure that she felt listened to just with that intervention. So definitely we can see in Maria Magdalene this crisis intervention or a crisis happening.
Thank you, Esther. Mary Magdalene wasn't the only one who endured crisis in the Bible. We can also talk about other characters, just as the prodigal son. How about you share with us his story, Malika?
Sure. So many of us have heard this story many, many times. It's found in Luke 15, 11 through 32. We have a situation that many of us as youth workers encounter where we have young people, maybe they're a little older and they view themselves in crisis, but we as adults may think, well, they're fine because they're at home, they're being taken care of, they have their chores, they have their focus, they have their purpose. But as what happened with the prodigal son, whatever was going on around his life in his home, he wasn't happy. He wanted to leave. He went to his father and asked his father, not only did he want to leave, but he wanted to leave with his inheritance. And as we know, an inheritance is usually provided when parent or parents die. And his father was right there. His father could have made it very, very difficult. He could have said, no, absolutely not. But he didn't do that. His father said, yes, you can go. And he granted his wish by giving him his inheritance. Another stressor in that situation was his older brother, who was thinking, you're younger. I'm left to do all of this stuff that now you're not going to be here to do. I can just, again, and there's the sibling stuff going on, the parental stuff, just the entire home being disrupted. And father does grant permission for the younger son to go. And you can imagine just how elated he must be. He goes out, he has plenty of money, so I'm sure he has plenty of friends. He's buying this, buying that, eating this, eating that, participating in all kinds of activities. And over a short period of time, you can just imagine what happens. He spends all of his money. And after having spent his money and done all of these activities, he has no friends to help him, no place to live. His clothes become tattered. He's one of those folks that you don't even want to be around. That's a stressor in and of itself. A situational, spiritual crisis. And in addition to that, he's so hungry that there's a physical crisis going on as well. And he, I would say, stoops to eating swine, one of the things that we know he was taught not to eat. In this level of degradation, the son just goes, listen, I can't make it out here by myself. Where can I go? And in his desperation, he decides to return home, not knowing how he will be received. He gets home. His father sees him coming. They're shouting. Everyone's happy to see him there. His father doesn't degrade him, doesn't make him feel bad. He welcomes him home with open arms, with love. So you can imagine how this son felt at being welcomed home. His brother, at seeing his younger brother come home, is wanting to look, I've stayed here, I've done all of these chores, I've done all of this work, and he comes home and he's fully accepted. So you can see how another crisis that has to be taken care of in the home. But it's very clear that this father believed in God, trusted God, and followed God's word, because he was able to find a way to bring his young son home. And I would imagine that he was also able, with his wisdom, to bring some peace within his home so that the family could go on. So again, there are quite a few stressors that are exemplified in this story, as there are many others in the Bible. It's the end of this one.
Thank you, Malika. Moving forward, we have, and pardon me if I pronounce it incorrectly, but Jairus' daughter. So Pastor Grady, if you can expand in what was her crisis, please.
Sure. So here we have a classic case of a double-headed crisis, which sometimes happens. It can be mitigated sometimes it can't be. But here's a situation where you have this leader of a synagogue who has a 12-year-old daughter who's sick, deathly sick, and he knows that Jesus can help, and so he makes his way to find Jesus. And of course, as often is the case, Jesus is traveling. He's on a journey. He's surrounded by a crowd. But Jairus finds Jesus, and he pleads for him to come and to heal his daughter. Well, so first of all, we have a family health crisis. And those are very typical. We'll run into those throughout our lifetime, either in our own lives or in the lives of people that you know. So Jesus responds, and as he's making his way to Jairus' house, he gets interrupted by another crisis, another health crisis, by a woman who's suffering from this bleeding issue. And so here you have a crisis within a crisis. And sometimes these can be really difficult. How do you prioritize, your attention? When you give it to one, you deprive the other, or you focus your attention on the second one and you deprive the first one of your attention. But it's not uncommon for during times of crisis for multiple calamities to take place. And so as you encounter crisis, just have your antenna, just have your radar up, knowing that it wouldn't be uncommon that while you're dealing with this issue, that something else develops. Sometimes it's within the same family, or sometimes it can be a completely unrelated issue. But while Jesus deals with her, he gets the news from Jairus's house that this young girl, this 12-year-old girl, goes ahead and passes away. And of course, the family crisis goes from bad to worse, and you can just imagine the emotions that are taking place. You can imagine, for a father going through this, what kind of a calamity is developing within his life and with his family's life. And so Jesus does probably one of the best things that you can possibly do during a time of crisis. You acknowledge the crisis. First of all, you empathize with what's going on. And so he reassures the father, and he continues to make his way to Jairus's house. And when he gets there, of course, there's the mourners, and they're already into doing their things because they're professionals and they're paid to cry. But Jesus comes along and he says, "Hey, she's not dead, she's sleeping." And of course, everybody bursts out laughing, not in a jovial way. They're just actually making fun of Jesus. And so within this crisis already within the family, there's already a struggle, a stressor, as Malika, as you mentioned here. You have a crisis of faith that's taking place. Who are you going to trust in a situation like this? And so Jesus proceeds to take the mother and the father and three of his disciples into a room, and he brings this girl back to life. And then he proceeds to tell the parents, "Don't tell anybody what just happened." Now, I'm not exactly sure how you mitigate this in a crisis. I mean, I don't know. What would you do? Somebody that was dead just comes back to life and you just don't tell anybody. Okay. Public relations crisis, maybe. I don't know what you want to call it, but keep that one quiet, and I'll leave that one to the experts to try and resolve. But here is just a classic example of dealing with a crisis within a family that just kind of tears people apart. And Jesus comes along in a way that only Jesus can, and he just puts his healing finger on this girl, and he brings her back to life, and he does it in such an empathetic way that it just provides an example for the rest of us.
Thank you, Pastor Grady. One more example for tonight would be the man with leprosy. Pastor Dombrowski, if you can share with us, what was his crisis?
Sure. Well, the passage here is Matthew chapter 8 and verses 1 through 4. It's a very brief story here. It occurs in the other Gospels as well, but I'll just read it here. It says, "When he had come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him, and behold, a leper came and worshipped him, saying, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Then Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, 'I am willing, be cleansed.' Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, 'See that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them.'" Well, first of all, the man's name remains, the man is nameless. We just identify him as a leper. But it's with that title or that condition that he's described with that really informs us as to the crisis that he's undergoing, because it is a disease. Leprosy was a disease of the skin and of the senses, the nerves, and it also involved a social crisis. Yes, question? So he had a dual crisis on his hands. He was considered to be unclean, and this is why he requested of Jesus, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." He wanted to be healed. Anybody with the disease of leprosy was considered to be unclean. And as a result of that, he was cut off from all social relations. And so he was isolated from family, from friends, from his community. So he is undergoing a crisis of two natures. One is the stress of the social stigma from having this, well, the disease, and then the social stigma of having this disease and being isolated from friends.
Thank you, Pastor Dombrowski. So as we can see, individuals in the Bible all have gone through different crises, right? Not only us here in nowadays with the COVID-19 and different things that we are, are enduring, are going through that. So, and it's important that we reassure ourselves. So Psalms 37:17-20 says, when the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. Now, what are some of those things that we can look at, right, when we're working with the Avengers or the Pathfinders and their families, right, when we're working with the young people? What are some of those needs or crisis situations that they could be facing? As leaders, we need to be a little bit intuitive, right? And sometimes we see certain behaviors that we tend to see as uncomfortable, right? But we don't look at what is the root of the problem. Sometimes those issues that are, little Johnny might be facing might be because of a crisis situation that he might be enduring at home. So let's go over some of those things that, we go. Marsha, what are some of those, can you give me some examples of what would be a crisis that a child or a teenager will go into?
One that we are dealing with in our own club right now is we've got some parents going through some very ugly divorces.
Okay.
And that is a crisis on the family, especially, and how that affects all of those around them.
Okay, so divorce is a crisis that affects the children and affects the family as a whole.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Malika?
She's
Muted.
muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. A family who doesn't have access to resources that they need in their homes, like food, or maybe even problem with shelter, but particularly food. Sometimes people are ashamed to share that they don't have what they need. And so the children, go without, and that creates a lot of shame, which are other issues that have to be dealt with. As staff, sometimes it's difficult to isolate what's going on. It's difficult to figure out how to access parents without having there be embarrassment, children without having them be embarrassed. So having a system in place to address those needs is important.
Those snacks at the end of the club meeting, right? That's right. That lunch after the club meetings are over will secure that those children are not going home hungry, right?
That's right.
Esther.
Well, some of the ones that I see in my area is addiction. Not only addiction to hardcore drugs, but we also have addiction like pornography. People are addicted to their phones and video games. So we also see negligence, abandonment, poor self-esteem, poor self of identity. And sometimes they want to stick around in the club and you're like, don't you need to go home? And they're like, well, my mom is busy, my dad is busy. They what they're trying to say is that they don't even know I'm missing. They just want to belong to somewhere. So something to look out is also that is not only those hardcore drugs that we should be looking at, but also those other type of neglects that are new to our era, like, pornography, video games, and so forth. We also have verbal, especially we have seen that in our communities as a religious community, that maybe the parents won't, hit them, but they will belittle them and say certain things. Also, we can see how they become more aggressive in the club, insensitive, egocentric. So looking for those identifiers will be really good. And also disabilities. Sometimes we don't speak a lot about that, but you and I in our area here in Massachusetts, we have dealt with disabilities. You know, sometimes the club directors have a difficulty understanding how they can integrate those kids that maybe have autism or Asperger's, you know, that also they can be neglected at home because the parents are overwhelming. And, you know, sometimes they will bring excuses to the kids why they don't have clothes, or, oh, he's always like that. I told him to dress this way, but it's actually the parents not taking care of their kids.
Mhm. Thank you, Esther. Pastor Dombrowski?
Sure. You know, one of the new ones that we might be seeing in our experience, regardless of what region we are, is children of refugees and refugee families. They may be new here, so they may have been placed here within a home situation, but nonetheless, what I have seen in regards to those types of situations is lack of clothing, and you know, where the church needs to intercede through their community service program to assist, because as the children are preparing to go to school, they find that if they don't have adequate clothing, then the challenge can be where they might be bullied or you know, oppressed or made fun of, and you know, placed in very uncomfortable circumstances. So with our Pathfinder clubs, adventurer clubs, many times we as churches have our clubs available for non-members, and that's a wonderful ministry to provide for that. But here's a way in which the church can intervene on a much broader scale and involve the entire church with the mission, and involve the youth club, the Pathfinders or Adventurers, in the overall mission of the church, and work in harmony on that principle of just being able to relieve the suffering, as you alluded to in that scripture reading from the Psalms. And that's what our role is as club leaders, is to be sensitive to these situations and to examine them and to deal with them sensitively as well.
Thank you, Pastor Grady. Anything else you would like to add?
Well, I can address the big white elephant in the room, and that is the crisis of dating. You know, if you live in a big metropolitan area, you got gobs of other Christian Adventist young people around the area, and you know, finding somebody that you can connect with, you know, might be just a little bit easier. Or you live in a college town, around a big university, gobs of people around that you can pick from. But if you're a young adult, you got young adult, maybe staff members on your Pathfinder club, or they're in your church, and they're single, and they've gone to college or whatever it is, or they're going to a local school. They've chosen not to go to an Adventist university, and they're stuck in this small hometown. And it may not be a crisis for anybody else in the church, but I guarantee you that it's a crisis for them, because they're feeling lonely. And they're thinking, you know, I don't want to just go out and mingle in the community, because I want to find somebody who's going to have the same set of values for me. And so they may have these feelings of awkwardness, you know, coming to church on Sabbath, and I'm the only person in my early 20s here, or maybe it's even getting to be late 20s, and I don't have anybody on my arm. I'm not sitting with anybody in the pew, and they're struggling. And so how do you relate to that as a Pathfinder leader? You know, these young people, they have this deep embedded sense of belonging, and they have this social desire. How do you meet that need? It's a crisis in their life. And so as leaders in your church, you got to have your antenna up for these people, and you got to come up next to them, and you got to just reassure them God has a plan for your life. You may not know it, you may not see what it is right now, but God's got a plan for your life. Just don't give up on it.
So one of the things that comes to mind is, how can we help the club leaders, the AY leaders, the church as a whole, pick up when these young people are going through crisis? There has to be some sort of identifiers that they are able to see, and you should be able to pick up. And I can say, for example, that child that is always at the first on the line and that it's picking up all the leftovers, right? That should be telling me that there's a need in the home for food, right? That they're lacking food. Or you see this family that is consistently coming through the food pantry. And let me tell you, our church members are embarrassed to come to the church, local church food pantry, right? Because they don't want to be labeled and they don't want to put their business out there, so to say. But that should be an indicator that there is a food issue coming into the home. Are there other things that we can look at and that we can pick up so we as leaders are able to know that there is a crisis in the home of this particular individual?
Glormar, if I could just address that.
Yes.
I think, as club leaders, we may not always have the answers, but I think one of the keys is for us to be connected with other leaders within the church. If you have a smaller church, it may be a little bit easier, but still as a leader, I'm saying from a pastor's perspective that, yes, it's true. People don't always come to you with the problem. Sometimes I'm the last to hear about the problem. But what is necessary is to be sensitive that when the problem arises, okay, what can we do? How can we address it? With this coronavirus situation, our church, by the grace of God, we had some good, strong leaders who had their ears to the ground, and they picked up on families in need, both within the congregation as without. And by the grace of God, we had a drive-by drop-off food drive, for the members as well as for those outside, and we were able to address the issue and do it in a discreet way. The point I'm trying to make is that when there is a crisis that is out there, we may not be aware of it, but the team can be aware of it. The team of the church can be aware of it, or even the friends of the synagogue. There may be people who may not be on the church books, but they're still friends of the church members, and they may, give us a clue as to what's going on there with a particular family in the community, or somebody within the ranks of the membership. So it's just being sensitive to having our ears perked up and having a team of people who can be listening in on the problem, rather than just having that burden placed on the Pathfinder director and that person alone. So it's a team effort.
Thank you.
Right. Gloria, can I just say something here regarding the Pathfinder leadership in their role in all of this? I've been a director of both our adventure club and now as our Pathfinder club as well. So I've been in a leadership position for the youth groups for probably close to 15 years now. And I think for me as a Pathfinder director, it's important for me to have a good connection one-on-one with each one of my Pathfinders. Now keep in mind, I don't have, my Pathfinder club, I had 68 kids this last year. And so it's not a small club, but it's of significant size. So, I know there are bigger ones, but it's important that I at least am able to, every time we have a meeting, I talk and say hello to each one of those kids. I try to make that connection. For me as a director, that is top priority, because I need those kids to feel like I have created a safe zone for them, that they can come and talk to me, share with me anything that they feel the need to share with me. And I have actually found that to be very successful. And I know not everybody can do that, but that has just been something that I've even tried to continue on as we've been in lockdown mode as well.
I guess it's important that as leaders, whether we're working with young adults, Pathfinders, adventures, families, we need to build relationships, right? That's the key for us to understand and be able to know that there's an individual or there's a family that is being impacted by some sort of crisis, right? And that, as Pastor Dombrowski said, we can come together as a team to provide adequate support to that particular group. So that brings us to the next question.
I just wanted to add something very quickly here. As a social worker, we are trained to observe, right? So listen, observe, and contact. If we do that and we train every single one of our staff to do that, the load will be balanced out. So just remember that: listen, observe, and contact. Just like Marsha was saying, have that personal contact. But it's not only the director that needs to carry that load. Every single one of the staff needs to do that. And if you notice, or we notice, that not everybody is doing the same thing, we need to have a dialogue and sort of reiterate the importance of that, or maybe do a jingle so people know that those are the three things that we should be looking at for everything. Not only for identifiers of things that are going bad, but also identifiers of things that are going good. Be positive at all times. It will boost self-esteem. They do that in schools. We have seen in social media teachers that are doing something different to promote self-esteem and promote self-efficacy on their students.
So thank you. So before we move on to the next segment, there's been a couple of questions related to this conversation that have come up. And one of those questions is, what do you do about children who are abused, but you do not want to open up? How can we provide supports to that particular child? And we can, sometimes see that physical abuse is easy to identify, but verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse, it's not easy to identify. How can we help those children open up a little bit, with the family?
Mhm.
Well, first of all, we need to be really sensitive to that. One of the stuff I understand about this crisis intervention honor that we're doing is that we are not teaching people per se to become counselors, but just crisis, just be of support so they can refer to people that have, the expertise to do this. So I always say it on the trainings that I have participated with this topic is that just remember, listen, observe, contact, and then we're going to refer, right? Make a referral to the professionals to make sure that those kids are protected and taken care of, and that they can come with more information as the things unravel, because they can trust you. One of the things that is lost is trust. And if the kid told you anything around that nature, trust me, they trust you very much. So why not to protect them? Mm-hmm. And it has to do immediately. It can't be something that you are going to linger and linger and linger. This is something that needs to be a remedy right away.
The one thing I can say is, as leaders in the North American division, we're all mandated reporters. So if there is suspect of abuse, and that goes to the pastor, that goes to the Pathfinder director, to the AY leader, to the Pathfinder staff, to the Adventure staff, every single individual who is having contact with children, we are mandated reporters, and you can call anonymously and in different states it has different name, but we'll say the Department of Children's and Family. We're required to call, and we can do that without giving our names. And they will come out and they will do their due diligence. There are some questions that are not related to this, so we will have a section at the end and we will try to address some of those. So moving on to question, what motivates you to want to help people, whether it's a family member or whether it's a complete stranger or whether it's one of the young people that we're working with within our local church or within our kids' friends too, because they're part, they become part of the family. What gives you that motivation to do that?
I grew up in my family with observing my parents helping people all the time. And so it just became a part. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It just became a part of kind of our family core value to grow up helping people. And it wasn't always, in general, it wasn't family members. It was just people around us in the neighborhood. And it was just something that I saw happening, understood what was happening, helped our parents. It just became something that I continued doing as I raised my daughter. And that's just something that we do as a family, is help people in many ways. Financially, food, clothing, talking, reading too. Sometimes it's not Sometimes just a social connection
Mhm.
that's helpful for people as well.
Yep.
Glory, let me just jump in here for a
Mhm.
second, because speaking from a male perspective, and obviously as a pastor, it's it's built within us a desire to fix things. You know, part of this is personalities. Okay, uh, I grew up in a home where dad was a fixer. He was a pastor too, and we have this innate desire that, you know, we see something wrong within a family or with a person. Our first motivation is we want to go and we want to try and fix it. We hate to see things out of balance, and so we want to step in right away. And so I always try to second guess or to check myself on that. Yes, I do want to help people process the pain that they're in, because I think that that's the quickest way to healing again. Um, Nature doesn't like things to be ambivalent. You know, if things get out of balance, there's a strong pull to try and normalize things. And so perhaps the best thing that we can do is to listen and to help people, ask the type of questions that will help people process the pain that they're experiencing from a crisis. Um, and so for me, that's, you know, that's my primary motivation is not necessarily to jump in and try and fix something, but just to go through the process of helping people process their own pain in a time of crisis.
Gloria Mar, I think also as another pastoral voice on this point, and I would echo that same thought, and you know, not just from the pastor's perspective, but from the male pastors, this need to fix thing. I would certainly echo that. But I think too is this a picture of what God sees as a crisis, and certainly the descriptors we've given already can be found in Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, beginning in verse 6, the Lord speaks through Isaiah. He says, "Is this not the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh. Then your light shall bring forth like the morning." And the passage goes on. But the prophet is describing God's people, and you know, as well as others, but God's people who are in a crisis. These are the factors that we've just described. Kids who, you know, may wanna, you know, stand in line for seconds because there's no food at home. You know, we see that maybe the father or the mother are unemployed and they're not, you know, we have the kids in the club, and there's that one family where they're always in need of, you know, extra grace, you know, where we're having to provide a little bit extra money because the father seems to be unemployed all the time, and it may be because, you know, he's an alcoholic or, you know, some sort of condition like that.
Well, there are
But we
not
see,
people in the country and they don't have skills.
yeah, or whatever the condition is. But the idea is that there is a crisis. The family is in a crisis. The individual is in a crisis, and God is saying, "Look, I'm empowering you guys to do something about this." And you know, the beauty of the church is that, you know, and I'm speaking about my own church, the Adventist church, is that there are so many avenues by which people can get involved, whether it's the youth clubs like AY or Pathfinders or Adventurers, and then even beyond that into women's ministry, men's ministry. So there's so many opportunities, there's so many windows into the church or into the body of believers, that if we are active in those respective ministries, then we should have a face. It shouldn't just be a face inward towards the church community, but a face that is outward facing, so that we can be reaching out to others and doing mission. Each one of those departments should be doing mission, and we could, you know, gain more access to all of these different situations, you know, that are described here as well as elsewhere within the scriptures.
Marsha.
Well, to me, it goes back to this question of who's my neighbor? Who am I responsible for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think God makes it very clear as to what his desire is for each of us, that we should have such this deep relationship with Jesus that it's just a natural outflowing of that love for God that wants us to help others, wants us to give what help, give what assistance can be given. And I think it's only through that love of Christ that we can truly do this. I would hope that we're more like the Good Samaritan than we are like the Pharisees and the priests and the rulers who walked by the man who needed some extreme help. He was in a major crisis at the time, but it was that common person, you might say, who stopped to help. And I think that is just so critical when it comes to being motivated, is that this outpouring of love.
So for our viewers out there, there's a couple of questions that have come in. I just want to remind you that by no means the intent of the honor is to provide counseling, right? We're just here to discuss and share what things can we do or better do to help those individuals that might be going through a crisis. And as we talk about this, I think that since March, the whole nation has been, the entire world has been in crisis at different levels, right? So there is one question in here that says, how can we provide supports to those club members, youth members that have lost loved ones as a result of the pandemic?
So I will say check in. One of the stuff that in the Atlantic Union Conference or Union decided to do, I think it's bi-weekly, is check in with those that you haven't heard, check in with those that you haven't talked to in a while. You ask for prayers, asking prayer to God to put names in your head of people that might need help, I think is a wonderful thing. And, you know, responding into the question asked before, I think that what motivates me is, like Malika was saying, in my house, we were built up to be helpers because that's what Jesus people should do, I guess, back then in the 70s and 80s or 60s. And that carried through when I was born. And that was sort of ingrained in me. And I thank God for that. So I love to help because I care. I love to care because I want God to put compassion in my heart. And one of the things I've been working on for the past maybe 5 or 6 years is to love the people that are hard to love. And I think that he brought me to work with people with addiction. I said as a social worker that, you know, I didn't want to work with them. They are hoarders, they don't change. You know, you have all this stuff in your head. And then that's what God brought me to work for the last 8 years. And I have grown and I have learned so much that, you know, they were joking when I have to leave the job last year, and they were saying, you even talk like us now. You know, at the end of the day, I knew their lingo. I have never used drugs. I'm not saying that I'm better than them, and I used to tell them that. But I always said to them, I'm the other face of the people that made a decision not to. Now that I'm better, it's based on decisions, right? So think about who cares. And also because we love being helpers. And my last one is, I want others to do unto me, right? To do others unto you like you want them to do unto you. So I always think about how, like the Pastor Dombrowski was saying, grace. And I think O'Grady was saying that grace. I mean, really, when you see that grace being extended to you when you don't deserve it, that's like really touch, you know, your heart. And Gloria Martin knows I lost my husband of 12 years 3 months ago. And the outpouring of support has been tremendously. So that's what we need. People to check in. People check in with me all the time to make sure that I'm okay, that I'm not depressed, that I'm doing stuff. Thank you, Glorimar, for asking me to do these things. So serving also help others. And as I share my story with others that have lost family members through COVID-19, have helped them too. So we need to think about, that's part of the crisis intervention, using your testimony to also help other people. And that's what God wants their children to do.
Thank you, Esther. And I think this brings up to the next point here. As we're talking about needs, right? Maslow classifies needs in 5 different categories. So let's start here with psychological. Marcia, do you want to touch a little bit on that, on psychological needs?
Psychological or physiological?
Psychological, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Well, we obviously need food and water to survive.
Yeah.
And if we don't have those basic needs met, then we can't really function at all in life. So if you're starving or if you're thirsty, there's nothing there for you to give anybody else. So to me, this is your basic need. This is that level of which you have to have this before you can even continue going on and being a functioning member of society.
So absolutely right. In order to get people to respond to us, right, their physiological needs need to be met. So you feed them, right?
Right. So like if I have a
food,
kid
the young adults are coming, right?
Right. So if I have a kid in Pathfinders or in the youth group or whatever, and their basic physiological needs are not being met, I can't minister to them in any other way. I need to meet that basic need first. So if that means I have snack bars hanging around in my Pathfinder closet ready to dole out to those who need it, then that's what I am going to do.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's talk about safety. Pastor Grady, do you want to touch on safety?
Well, certainly, that's probably one of the greatest stressors in life is being able to feel comfortable and safe in your environment. Because if that need isn't being met, you're going to really struggle with all the other needs as well. Obviously, more important than safety is going to be food and water, no doubt. But beyond that, just feeling comfortable, feeling like it, not only physically safe but emotionally safe. And for those pathfinders that may be coming to your club, that may be the safest spot that they know at the moment. Mm-hmm. And so whatever environment you happen to be in, the one place that you got to be sure that you create as a safe space has got to be those moments when your pathfinders are all together. And when you can create that kind of environment there, it opens up for dialogue, for them to maybe share about maybe those places that aren't so safe in their life. It could be being bullied online. It could be in school and not fitting in because you're an immigrant or you're a minority or whatever it is, the body type that you have. All those contribute towards people's ability to feel safe in their environments. And once you can help a person feel safe in their environment and help them work through those issues, that does allow the space for them to go on and to mature and to develop themselves in other areas of your life. But next to food and water, bam, a young person has got to be safe.
Malika, can we talk about esteem? That need to be, unmute yourself. You're muted, Malika.
Okay, I think I'm on now. All right. So when we think about esteem, we're talking about how a person sees themselves. It's like the mirror inside of themselves, or they look out and it's looking back at them. And do I feel confident? Do I feel like people respect me? Do people feel like I have some level? People even recognize who I am. When just a total sense of self. That sense of self-esteem, we actually begin to shape that when we're young, infants. When a baby does something and somebody claps or does something and their eyes sparkle and they grin and they go to do it again, it's that sense of acceptance that they are experiencing from that other person. And those are the kinds of things that as we develop, become older and older, we're looking at other people to help us see, okay, am I valued by this person? When I say something, do they look at me? Does it sound like they're listening to me? Those kinds of things help us It's not that someone is making us who we are, but they're reflecting upon us how the world around me receives me as I build up these tools to become who I am. And at a certain point, it becomes more of my responsibility as I grow older. If there's balance in my life from my parents, from my teachers, from some of my friends, from older adults who are older than I am but younger than my parents, do I receive acceptance from them that I'm getting this more full picture of just how far I can step out? Based upon that, it gives me confidence to do even more. For the person who lacks a sense of themselves, it's just kind of the opposite. That maybe when they did something as when they were younger and they were looking to be noticed, there was no response to what they did. Without that mirror telling them that this is okay and yes, you're okay, we don't have at that point the mechanism to say, oh, I'm okay, there's something going on with them. We take it within. And all of those opportunities that we have as our social world expands from friends, teachers, other people, maybe we can't reflect or share with them who we really are because when we were younger, that mirror that said I'm okay didn't give me that piece of information. So we kind of have that way of looking at both situations, how to help people feel better and stronger about who they are. It seems simple, but it really is very complex. And as leaders working with our children, sometimes we have to start really small, a group activity where we're all doing something. We take a plant that maybe isn't doing so well, and we learn how to nurture that plant with water, with some sort of organic fertilizer. My daughter would say manure, and I would go, ew. But things that help the plant grow, water it, love it, make sure it's getting sunlight, and after a while it begins to sprout. Many of us have had opportunities where we see children just, their eyes get bright when they've accomplished something. So opportunities that are age appropriate for young people to do things and have reflected back to them that's great. Not great in terms of something that's above their ability to understand. Thank you, that was wonderful. Now let's do something else. So at each level, as leaders, we are presenting more and more challenges to them, kind of like our honor structure, like our level structure within both Adventures and Pathfinders, so that we can develop a positive sense of who we are, how we relate to the world, so that we can grow and become the people that God wants us to be.
Pastor Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about self-actualization needs? Unmute, please.
Yeah, self-actualization is that highest of Maslow's needs on that hierarchy or that pyramid. And what it allows the person to do is to become something above and beyond the meeting of the daily needs of themselves. You know, it allows the individual to get out of the survival mode. Like we looked at that first, and I'm just going to scan down here at the list that you had provided for us, just to read off of that. And, you know, you have the physiological, do they have food, shelter, safety needs, security, you know, do they feel that they're under threat, constant fear, or are they feeling secure? Social needs, do we have friends? And then as our sister talked about, esteem needs, our own value, but then going above and beyond that to actually assisting others, becoming really, you know, we're made in the image of God. We have to constantly, not stress that, but emphasize it. We are made in the image of God, and God goes beyond himself. He does, he takes care of us. He's constantly taking care of us. 7 billion people on the planet, and who knows how many other worlds might be out there. So he is constantly looking out for not number one, but for those of us. And self-actualization is that that idea that there's more to life than just food and shelter and clothing and taking care of me, myself, and I. And so that's what we're here to help do. And I think, pathfinders, adventurers, but pathfinders, just the name Pathfinder just illustrates that idea that we are leading the way. Why? Because we're clearing a path for others to follow in. And so that's a form of self-actualization. And so that's the vision of what we want our club to be. But oftentimes it's within the club, we can't meet those needs immediately or we can't help the child rise to that level. Why? Because, again, there's an absence of food, shelter, clothing, security, social needs, and whatnot. So our job is to help them, find that within that sphere that we're working in.
Thank you. I think the last piece here on Maslow's scale would be social needs. Esther, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes. So when we think about social need, especially during the pandemic, I have seen so many clubs doing Zoom meetings, and I also thank the organization for providing all these honor classes. And I have seen even regions doing their camporees virtual. So be creative, right? So to sustain that connection, to sustain that sense of belonging and acceptance. One of the things I love about Pathfinders and even Master Guides, when, in our countries like Central America, they actually have a club just for Master Guide. And they do so many different things together so they can connect. And I remember very vividly those memories. We also here in Massachusetts, we have the cadets, the medical cadets. Is another way that the young people can provide their services and also connect with each other. So it's very important that we do not forget that. We also have to take into consideration diversity. So make sure that we not only have teams that are all white or all Asian or all African Americans or all Hispanic. Hopefully within the brackets of ages, we can mix them up a little bit. If we cannot mix them up, then make sure, like Malika was saying, to create the space and the opportunities to make sure that they could collaborate on doing things together. So social needs are very important. Like we know now, it's so hard to hug or shake hands or do anything. But again, you see the kids rise above us, right? Because they were the ones that came up with the bumps of the elbows and the shakings of the foot. So they will always find a way how to connect. It's us that we need just to listen and watch what they do and follow suit. They like that. Fun fees, handshakes, whatever it takes. But make sure that that social environment is nurtured and is safe for all of them to express themselves in a safe and respectful way.
So looking at all these pieces, right? Can we as leaders be the cause of creating commotion or creating a crisis when we choose to ignore the things that are happening within our environment? Do we?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Right?
definitely.
Yeah, definitely. When we overlook those social needs, a place for them to express themselves, and we just shut them down and be like, no, that's not going to be. And usually that happens when some of the kids want to do something, maybe a skit. I remember some of the kids wanted to do a skit in their own version. And some of the elders were saying like, oh, no, that's not how the story goes. And we're like, but that's their interpretation. Isn't it? That's what we want, for them to understand the Bible stories and to apply it so they can understand. And they couldn't even understand why the elders were having trouble with that. Right. So also fight for them. One of the things that I have learned from Glorimar is that fight for your kids. we are the master guide, just like the pathfinders, right? They're trying to find the path, and who are leading to that? Us, who already we hope to have found the path, right? And that's why we go into master guide. So please, let's use those tools and also those badges of honors that we have done throughout our years a good use, right? For them to find the good path.
So now that we have identified what is a crisis, right? We have an idea of what it is. What are some of those needs or crises that our young people go through? What are the steps, right, that we can use to process and intervene during those moments of crisis, right? Because there has to be a set of steps that we will need to follow in order to make sure that we are de-escalating a situation, making sure that everybody is safe, right? And then we can move on to next steps. So Pastor Dombrowski, step number 1 talks about defining the problem. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, you can't get anywhere unless you understand what the problem is. So you have to define it. You have to, and in order to do that, you have to listen. You may be able to nail it down as to what it is, but you will never be able to do that unless you talk to the individual by asking questions. And these are, how are you feeling today? Open-ended questions. Because if you ask a closed-ended questions, did you eat, and that can help too. Did you eat today? No, I did not eat today. Okay, why not? Was it there was no food in the house? Was it this? Was it that? So, it's a combination of questions, open-ended, closed-ended questions, but, being a detective and a discreet detective, because you have to show an interest in the child and yet not sound alarmed at the same time, not, just being able to gather the facts and, you may have to go home, do a home visit and talk to the parents further, or the adult who is overseeing the child. But the facts remain is that once you have those facts, then you can define what the problem is. Oh, it's this. And sometimes it may not be a crisis at all, just a miscommunication or misunderstanding. And what perceived might be a storm on the horizon really isn't that at all. The sky may not be falling all the time.
Absolutely. Okay. Step number 2 talks about safety. Malika, can we expand on that?
Yes. When we're talking about safety here in a crisis situation and intervention, we're talking about making sure that we help to create, along with others, an environment or a situation where we can make sure that this young person can be safe, that there's no risk, physical risk, emotional, mental, any of that. And oftentimes, in some situations, depending upon what we've done during the defining of the problem, if it moves to where we're thinking that the person may be trying to hurt themselves, again, we have to, let me just kind of back up just a little bit, because as volunteer helpers, we should not be trying to do all of this in a vacuum. Because one of the things that's important, and because we want to help, we have this urge to help and take care of our children, and without the boundaries around just how far should we go, sometimes we get so far into it that we lose sight of really helping the person who's intended to receive services. So we need to always make sure that we have someone to talk to about what's going on with this child, that we're not just out there by ourselves. So whatever the structure is within our club, within our youth department, is there a youth elder? Who is in line for us to go to? If we're not the director, then of course we need to involve the director. So we just have to go up that line so that we're not out there all alone with young people. So now that I've said that, Again, we have to look at, is there a risk assessment that the child may be hurt in some way? And our goal is to gather the resources to help make sure that this person, to remove the risk. Some of it is asking questions. If the person is, if it's a threat that they may say they want to harm themselves, we have to assess and look at an immediate risk. But very quickly at this, again, as volunteers, we need to get other people involved. If we're professional counselors, like I believe some people are right here on the panel, they may be legally and able to do that. My credentials have long since passed. So I personally have to bring someone else in to help. So we have to assess where we fit also. And again, as people who really want to help, sometimes we forget. And our jobs aren't investigators. Our jobs are to link our young people with people who can really provide the services. So we're resource managers, so to speak. So again, that doesn't mean we love our children any less. It doesn't mean we won't go to the far ends, but we have to do it within a cushion that says our children can get the help that they need if we cross a boundary. So in addition to looking at these risks and making sure that we bring together the proper resources, we have to find some way to work with the families as well so that they know what's going on. We can't work and do things for our children and haven't at least let families know, because families, sometimes people don't like doing stuff with their kids that they don't know about, most of the times. So we can't always assume that all of those I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed. So all of it, there's just so much to this. I'm sorry, it's hard to not get into it. But again, we're acknowledging that the safety of our youth is very, very important. Whatever environment that we're in, let's say they're in our Pathfinder room and we're talking to them and they're getting upset and angry. We can look out around and assess our immediate area. Is there anything sharp, anything that our child we're worried about could use to hurt themselves? So that's something we have to look at before we bring our child into the environment. So just all the things that we can do to keep them safe, as well as to keep ourselves safe. Who do we need to call in as our backup? All of this should be well thought out, knowing that things happen just like that. So as a staff, we have to practice this. We have to work out scenarios to help us decide the what ifs. Going through the what ifs will tell us whether we need more training, access more resources to help us get through what we need to get through. So again, we're assessing our ability to help. We're making sure that we've done all of the things legally that we need to do. And then not last and not least at all, we're making sure that we can keep this young person safe.
So we've talked about step one in the process is identifying the problem, ensuring step two is ensuring that the person is safe. Then we move on to the next piece, right? Now that we've met those two things, how do we provide actual supports to this person, Pastor Grady?
Well, certainly step one and step two are absolutely critical. A point in time is going to come in this process when what they need is somebody just to come along next to them and reassure them of their value. Let them know that they are important people. Let them know that God is intricately concerned about their situation. So just having that ability, and I got to tell you, some people in your club can do this well. There are going to be some people who just cannot do this. This is not their gift. And you just kind of need to know this in the back of your mind. And so when you see a young person going through some troubled times, be very selective as to who it is that you ask to go and to draw next to this person that's in crisis. But in addition to that, this time of providing support, has to include the space to allow the person who's going through this crisis to reconcile what it is that they're experiencing in this crisis with maybe even their faith in a loving God, because that's going to come into question sometimes. You know, if it's a loss of a loved one, you know, why did God allow this to happen in my life? Why did he take this person? They're going to have these kind of questions. Why has he allowed me to suffer this illness that's taken place? Why did I have to be one of the ones that contracted this virus? You know, so these are the kind of questions that may come up if you allow the space and the connection that you have with the young person. And you got to understand that it's very likely that in a time of crisis, as you are providing the support, people are going to be angry. Emotions are going to bubble up to the top. And we got to just know that this anger is not directed at ourselves. We got to allow people to voice their frustration. We got to allow people to voice their anger and to question. And even if they're questioning God, don't be intimidated by that. God is bigger than all this. He doesn't need to be defended. And this is not a time to be defending. This is a time to allow people to vent and to verbalize the pain that's in their life, because that's really what's coming out is their pain. And one other aspect of this has to be added. As you're allowing people to vent their pain and to verbalize their frustration and to verbalize their anger, you know, sometimes theology may come out that may you're wondering, where in the world did that come from? I mean, you grew up in this church or whatever it is, and they may say something that maybe it was just part of their heritage or part of their culture, and it came out, and it just, or maybe just it's a theology that gets verbalized wrongly. This is not the place to be correcting theology. This is not the time to be correcting theology. This is a time to simply provide support and to let people vent. You know, a picture comes to my mind of the prophet standing on the walls of Jerusalem, and he's angry at God and he's yelling at God, why have you allowed, you know, this to happen? This was not a time for explanation. It wasn't a time for defense. It was a time for venting, and you got to allow that to happen. And then I can't end this section of providing support without mentioning this one thing. Don't insert yourself into people's pain. That is so easy to do. You can say, well, you know, I know what you're experiencing. I know how you feel. That's completely irrelevant. The reality is that everybody's pain is unique. Everybody's pain is so personal. There's just no way that you can understand how people feel. And so don't make it about you. You know, this goes back to my whole issue of, you know, we have this strong desire to fix things. And so the way that we fix it is we identify it with something that's happened to us in the past. And so that's the way we operate. But this is not a time to do that. This is not a time for fixing. This is not a time to be inserting yourself and making yourself a part of the story. Let people in crisis verbalize their own pain. Let them verbalize their own anguish. Let them verbalize their own frustration, and just be there. Come next to them to just listen and affirm their value and say, God understands.
Thank you. So now we've defined the problem. We ensure that there's safety. We have connected the individual with different supports. What are some alternatives that we can provide, Esther?
So remember, we are providing first aid in crisis. We are not trying, like the pastor was saying, to fix the problem. We are just trying to assess the situation and see what we can do. So first of all, prioritize. The first priority will be, explore the potential solutions that the person can come up as these things happen. Even though I have to also point out that crisis affect people, like the pastor said, Grady, affect people differently. But the three main things how crisis affect people is taking in information. So do not talk too much. Allow them to express themselves and just listen. Also, the second thing that affects people is processing information. So if you are telling them too many different things for them what to do, which is not something that we're encouraging you to do today, and then acting on the information. And we are going to be talking at the end how we can do the acting on the information. So please assess the situation, whether it's an emergency that they have to leave like right now, that they need certain things right now, or whether it's just a crisis. Then, ask the individual who are some people that they can call. In social media, they have a post that there's someone on your face pointing at a trigger, and it says, who would you call first? And then it just asking you, it's something jokingly, but it's asking you who's going to pick up the phone if you call. So it's something like that, right? Who will pick up the phone if they call? Just ask the person that is in crisis. So the next thing is that if they said, I don't have anybody, or my mom is out of town or whatnot, asking when they have found themselves in the same situation, what they have done in the past. Some of those skills, are very important because they have survived before. So like the pastor said, we're not rescuing people because most likely these things have happened before and they know how to cope with it. So we just want to make sure that they know that there's an extra person trying to help them out somewhere, somehow, either by listening or providing certain things that they might need. And then lastly, encourage them with positive thinking. Offer a prayer for them. Maybe ask them what do they want that prayer to go in specifically, or ask them exactly what they need. And just encouraging them that they will be with them through the process. If you can't, if you cannot, you can say, I'm so sorry that I cannot attend right now, but if it is okay with you, can I call somebody else that is an expert or can assist you? So asking always for permission for that person to see if someone also can jump in and intervene and help you out.
So the next step in this process, I'm going to Marsha, I believe. We're talking about how do we make plans.
So by the time we get to this phase, we've spent quite a bit of time with the person that we're helping, that we're working with. We've been able to ask them questions. We get a sense of the scope of what's going on. We've probably discussed some resources, but now we have to make a plan on how to access for them to move forward. This is also an opportunity to not turn the tables, but to allow the person that we're working with to gather, to assume responsibility, more responsibility into what's going on, what the final result is going on. And so one of the questions needs to be, okay, what do you want? What's your goal? Asking them, are there 3 goals, 3 things that you want to accomplish, 3 places that you want to be, whatever those are, so we can start to have this person develop responsibility for the activity, for what's going to happen to them. So in making this plan, once we identify what the goal is, it could just be a statement. Is it attainable? And then it's kind of easy to walk through, or easier, to help them walk through what it is they need to do to have this plan, or to help them realize this goal. So we're restoring control to the situation back to them. So what's a first goal? Do you need support? Well, what are we looking at? Let's say that the person needs some outside help for services in their home and providing for their children. And it's financial help. And their goal is to be able to provide that financial assistance. So the plan might be to research resources in the community to get this help. So that's one part of it. So we just kind of walk down the plan. Do you have support people in place? Who are they? Do you know their phone numbers? So this becomes as detailed as possible so that there are steps to get to the top without it being overwhelming. Each piece at a time. We have to make sure, again, that the steps are things that can be attained. Talking about a college education so that they can ultimately provide for their family is a wonderful goal to have, but it might not be achievable right now. So we're looking for the things that can be achieved easily or right now. Do you have food for the next day? Do you have food for the next 3 days? What are the resources that you need to connect with to get that food? You need medication for your children? Okay, I have this resource list. Let's put this down, and you identify the numbers of the people that are closest to you where you live, where you can call. Oh, you're not sure that you can make that call by yourself? I can sit right here while you call. So you're providing help, but the person, you're sort of transferring the action processes back over to this person. At the end, you have a short list of things for the person to do, and also other people to contact because you're trying to build a resource and support network. This plan is in place. They know where they want to get to. They've identified some intermediate steps. They've identified who to talk with if they get to a place and they're not sure what to do. And you assure them that you are there with them to help them, but they also have other resources that they can also begin to lean on. So you're building their support tree or their support system as well. So I think that's it.
Okay. So the last step throughout this process is obtaining commitment, right? We've identified the problem. We've made sure the individual is safe. We've determined, provided resources. We've gone through steps, but now we have to obtain a commitment, right? Because if I'm going through a hard situation, I am the one who has to decide whether I want to fix the problem or not ultimately, right? So how do I get that? For the most part, we work on writing a crisis, what they call a crisis safety plan for individuals. And what does that crisis safety plan include? Who are people I can call when I'm feeling a certain way, right? Who can I talk to? Is it my club director? Is it a friend? Is it a family member? Is it, my pastor? Whoever that person is, who am I going to call? So that will be probably step one in the process. Who am I going to identify as my contact person when I am going through a certain situation of that? In addition to that, in that safety, I'm going to commit and say like, okay, so the ultimate goal is that I need to pick up the phone and I need to connect with different resources within the community within a certain time frame. So I have to have the person ensure, we're going to write those steps down. We're going to put down those phone numbers that the person needs to call next to them, right? And we're going to follow up with them to make sure that they are committed to doing this, follow up with the plan that has been set up by them at that point to ensure that those needs or crisis or situations that they're going through, they're going to find ways to solve them, right? And it doesn't become a circle where the person is always dwelling in the same situation consistently all the time, right? I'm always unemployed, or I'm always homeless because I'm unemployed, I'm not able to pay my rent, or there's no food in the home, right? But I don't make any arrangements to go to the food pantries, or or I use my food stamps for something else differently than it is to buying food, or the income that I have, I send it to my country to pay for my family's expenses in my country, but I am not putting food on the table, are things that we see in the community consistently that impact our church families in one way or the other. As we have gone through all of these things, there's one thing that we need to include, and I'm going to say, how can we nurture and include meeting those spiritual needs throughout this process, right? Because throughout all the pieces that we've talked, there's one key ingredient that needs to be included in there. Pastor Grady, would you like to expand a little bit on that particular piece, on providing that spiritual nurturing to individuals when they're going through a particular crisis?
Well, that's a huge question, of course, because it can't get answered in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and it doesn't happen in a short period of time in the life of a person. This is something that's, they're on a journey. We're all on a journey. Mm-hmm. And we have to recognize that every young person that we're relating to is on a journey of their own. And some of them will go through times of crises in that journey. Some of them won't. There is an old adage, I guess, in the political world, is that don't ever let a crisis go to waste. Well, you don't have to intentionally make an effort to do this, but inevitably, when an individual goes through crisis, it does provide an opportunity of growth for that person. And this is where, as the counselor, as the club leader, as an adult with leadership of roles within your club, that you can recognize this, and you can find a way and make some space to bring up that kind of conversation with a person, especially after they've gone through crises. And so this whole spiritual component of these spiritual needs, these are essential in the life of every person, because they help us define ourselves. They help us find our roles and our purposes in life, and they help find us some meaning in life. And so it's very important that we provide the time and the space to process the spiritual implications of experiences that we have in our lives, whether they be dangerous experiences, whether they be experiences that challenge our existence, our health, or the benefit of a relationship with somebody. These are things that all have spiritual implications. And ultimately in the life of a young person, and I can tell you this, most young people aren't thinking about death. We do that as old people. When the older we get, we're all thinking about that, end of life type of stage in our lives. And a young person may have a grandparent who's at that point in time. They may have a parent who is elderly and they're struggling with this issue. But at some point in time, an opportunity should be taken to bring this up, because it helps a young person see themselves in more of a cosmic role in terms of what's going to happen to them, at a time of death, should death happen, heaven forbid. What does God's words have to say about this? What kind of comfort, what kind of hope can God provide in my life to help me deal with these spiritual issues? And in times of crises, makes these kind of conversations much more pertinent in the life of a young person. If they don't have a crisis, they're not thinking about it. But those who have a crisis, who have experienced a crisis, they have, I can guarantee you, at some point in time, some moment in their thinking, they've asked themselves the question, what would ever happen to me if I died? And this is where we come along as leaders, and we assure them what God has provided through His Word and through our own experience and our own testimonies about how we have confronted and how we deal with life-threatening situations. So don't forget the spiritual component. It's a prime opportunity, especially after a crisis, to talk about spiritual things, because they have much more meaning at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we have moved along and we're getting close to start concluding here, we have tried to demonstrate what are appropriate ways to ask questions, right? What should we steer away? But most importantly, when people are going through a crisis, as it has been mentioned before, listening is key throughout this process. And it's listening to understand not listening to respond, because there's a difference between A and B. And sometimes when individuals are going through different situations, we listen to respond, and at times we can become judgmental through that process. And that's not what, that absolutely we should be trying to stay away from that. So let's talk a little bit about those ethical principles that individuals need to follow in order to avoid that we're putting them in great harm, right? Because whatever we say to that person in the midst of whatever situation they're going through will have an impact for good or for bad. So we want to be very conscientious about having and demonstrating good communication and good listening skills. So what does listening involve, Esther?
Listening skills involve focusing, observing, understanding, and responding with empathy. And when I think about responding with empathy, I think about conveying empathy and instill in hope. You can say something around the lines like, "You seem to be having a tough time. How can I help you?" Right? Also, be genuine. When you say, "How can I help you?" It's not going to be, "I'm going to pass the bucket." You're going to be there with that person. That person needs to know. Also, respect. Just because they are a child or they are a teenager, we're not above anybody. We can come down to their level so they can understand us and be in the same eye contact. Acceptance. They need to feel that we accept them and we're not being judgmental. And being sensitive as well. And I like what Pastor Grady said. It's not our story. Remember that, please. Remember that. It's their story. It's all about them. When they said, what would you do in my situation? You will want to pass the bucket back to them and say, what do you think that you should do in these situations? Because they need to understand that what they say is important, that their response is also important. Also use direct language. I am concerned that you seem to be trying to handle a lot of things on your own. Talking to a pastor or talking to a counselor might help you. Do you want me to facilitate that? Right? Again, that genuine of helping and being there along the way. Also communicate confidence. The counselors and the pastors are great. They are supportive and they are good professionals. Please go to them. So think about first, open-ended question. How are you feeling today? Right? That's a good starting conversation when you notice something. Close-ended questions can be a yes or no question, like, are you okay? And usually the kids will be yes, no, right? Think about restating and clarifying statements that they have told you. Oh, so you said that this thing happened in your house. Is that what I understood? Oh, did you say that you feel this way? Is that what I understood? So always clarifying and reframing back to them. And remember, owning feelings. Try to always model I statements. That's what we teach, in counseling, because when you use I statement, it's empowering.
Marsha, what other questions could we use to, as conversation starters, when we notice that there's something happening with our young people?
Well, when we're talking, kind of building on what Esther's been saying, is the fact that when we are talking to our young people, is that you want to give them, or you want to actually identify to them what behavior or something that you've noticed. Like I observed from my perspective when you came into the meeting today, you were kicking your book bag around, or you were throwing things around. So you begin talking to them and facilitating questions for them by saying things that you've observed. You observed a behavior. It's called, in communication, they have this thing called a perception check. And a perception check has 3 steps. The first step is that you identify the behavior that you've seen. The second step is that you give them 2 possible answers already. Did your mom do something to you, or did your mom do something to you at home? Or did one of the kids here at Pathfinders say something to you? And then the third part is you ask for clarification. So this is just a very good kind of step-by-step process that you can actually use to begin identifying things with the kids, and even anybody that you talk to. And that just is because those are the kinds of things you're wanting to help get clarification, because we have our own way of looking at things because of our own worldview, our the way we've brought up. These are the things that kind of are going to shade the way we look at things, but that might not be the way somebody else is looking at things. I noticed that in the chat, somebody had stated something about, what do you do if if one of your leaders talks about a gender bias, where they say something negative about somebody in the LGBTQ community. Well, that's a big thing right now, and we have to be facing these in our clubs. And so some kid could have overheard a staff member saying something like that, and you need to be willing to kind of accept that that's might be one of their options to saying, well, this is what I heard, and this is how I made me feel.
Okay, and I could say like other questions that could be added, right? Aside from these steps, because we want to start conversation. Can you help me understand what's going on with you today, right?
Right.
Can you tell me, how do you feel about this whole gender bias situation? Can you share your feelings with me, right?
The key thing here, Glory, is I feel that it takes time, and we have to be listening. True, genuine listening takes time, and so often we want people, we want to say, well, how are you doing today? We want everybody to say fine, everything is great. Truly, most people will say, they don't really want to know how they're actually doing. And so we have to be willing as leaders, no matter who we talk to, be willing to let them respond in a time manner of which they are comfortable doing so. And it may be all of a sudden you realize they've opened up and just flooded you with what is going on in their lives. So you as a leader then have to, if you're like preparing for a Pathfinder meeting, you have to be really quick on your feet to say, maybe look at your deputy director or somebody else and say, hey, I need to take care of this situation. I need you to start leading out. Here's my plan for today. And this is, so these are the kinds of things that we could say, yeah, these are great. These are all kinds of wonderful questions to ask. But at the same time, I think we also need to be willing to shut our mouths and just listen. I teach communication classes. And so one of the things I tell my students, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them proportionately. And that is really key in how we actually are interacting with one another.
Good. So moving into that listening piece, Malika, what are some skills that we need to practice in order to be better listeners?
Thank you. Some of these are kind of tough.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we get in a group that we're familiar with, but we need to really discuss serious things, we're working with kids that need our help, it's sometimes hard to take and to remember listening skills and how important it is. And one of them is not talking while others are talking. Why is that hard? Because everybody's excited and they want to tell it. So sometimes the more peaceful the convener is, that can help. And if we as leaders also do that, then we help to encourage our children to follow suit, not talking while others are talking. Sometimes it's important for us to take notes depending upon what's going on. And it's also nice to let everybody know why we're taking notes and that they won't go anywhere and that we're not attaching names to what people are saying. Because then it just helps with the trust with the folks that we're involved with. Asking follow-up questions on key points. That's been covered before a few minutes ago. not fidgeting or playing with pens or hair or glasses or anything. Using appropriate and regular eye contact. Now, to do this, we have to know who we're talking with, who's in our group. Because with some people, there's a level of, particularly young people, they may be taught not to look at adults. And we're saying, look at me when I'm talking to you, that kind of thing. Hopefully it's not with that tone, but just understanding where each person is really the key to listening and effective communication, or one of them. Respecting the other person's time and schedule. So we say this meeting is going to start at noon and we come flying in at 12:15 and pulling our stuff together, and you know, we have kids in there watching us like, and we're upset with them when they're late. Where are they learning this from? Moving right along, and being willing to end on time. You know, often when I'm doing meetings or in meetings and someone takes me even 5 minutes beyond, and I'm like, you said this was going to end. And sometimes we have to say, sorry, you know, we got, I won't say out of control, but we were really excited about our activities, and we've hit the time when we promised we would end. May I have your permission to go a little bit longer? But the other thing I always say, never ask a question that is open-ended where the person can say no and you're not willing to abide by it. Because if people say no, you have to end right there. So don't ask that question if you're not willing to respect the answer that you get. But that's one of the ways of helping people understand that you want to respect their time. And let's, you know, we need to be, things happen and we understand, but if things happen every week or every time we meet and you're always the person coming in late, that's not good. Thanking the person for their time. I think sometimes as a group we're getting better at it, but we don't, this is all volunteer time and we're dedicated. We are. But sometimes people have, my children are grown. Two of my grandchildren are grown. I don't have the encumbrances that people have. I can just hang out, but not everybody's like that. And so I can't expect everyone to, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I have to, when people extend their time, thank you, and look each person in the eye and say, thank you for your time today. I know we went a little bit longer. I'm glad that you were willing to allow us to do that. Would someone please close with prayer? Just a way that lets people know that we care about them, appreciate their participation, and are willing to be quiet when it's time.
Thank you, Malika, for sharing that. One thing I will point out here, in the beginning, we talked about refugees, right? And some of these families, their culture and they are not the kinds that will do the eye contact piece, right? Especially if there's a male and a female, right? The female will remain quiet and she will. So we also have to be mindful of those things when we are having, you know, this kinds of conversations, because the fact that the person is not looking at you doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested in the conversation. Is just there's a cultural aspect that it's ingrained in that, and we need to, I mean, be understandable and sensitive towards that. So, you know, moving on to the last piece here.
Lori, before you move on, let me just say that there is kind of something to help these leaders out when it comes to talking with people. It's a stop, look, listen. Stop the other things that you're doing around you. And if you have to, find an environment of which a good conversation can happen, that there's not all kinds of noise or other kind of distractors. Look means that you would kind of observe the person or the people that you're talking to see what kind of nonverbal cues they are giving you, because nonverbal is huge. If somebody says, I am doing fine, but their nonverbal cues say, man, these people are in crisis or something's going on, you need to pay attention to those nonverbal cues. And then the stop, look, listen, and then begin listening to really what they're saying. And we've kind of gone through all that, but to me, that's just kind of a 3 kind of step. And actually the 4th one is ask appropriate questions. But that's just a really kind of quick thing. If they want to write it down, stop, look, listen, ask. Good little kind of thing to keep in mind when they're thinking about as they communicate with those.
And I just want to add that I forgot to mention, let's not promise anything that we cannot also keep. You know, sometimes the kids will come. I know that it has happened. Gloria Martin and I has dealt with situations like that in which the kids will come and say, I'm sexually active. I have slept with 3 or 4 of the kids from the Pathfinder Club, or I have done this, or I have tendencies to be gay or homosexual or bisexual. How can I, bring this out to my family? I'm trying to run away, or I've been thinking about suicide, just something simple like that. Let's think about those ethical issues. Where are you meeting the kids? Where are you in the church? Where are you, when these conversations happen? Always ask the kid, or hopefully you have been paying attention and know who is the next Pathfinder leader that these young people are trustworthy with, that you can have a conversation with them in the room and say, we're going to have to bring somebody else to help me out with this situation. So you cannot find yourself also, or the kid feels that, oh, you're going to get my mom into trouble, I'm going to get my daddy into trouble, sort of make sure that genuinely, well, this is as far as I can come on helping you. We're going to have to bring some other people in to deal with this situation, and I'm going to stay with you along the way.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. So now, as we move along, right, the last piece of this honor talks about making referrals, right? And there's one point, I'm going to start here with Pastor Grady, because people think that the pastors are able to fix every single problem that arises at the local church. And there's the pastors, phone ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning because, like I said, I need the plunger because my toilet is broken. What pastor, in reality, what can you do, and what you cannot do when people come to you with problems, or are you actually able to fix it all?
What a loaded question. And you dumped that one on me at the very end. Oh my goodness. Well, you're right. There is that understanding, I guess it is, or perception that we're here because we can fix everything. And if your pastor is somebody who has that gift, God bless him, and you hang on to that guy for as long as you can. But for the vast majority of the rest of us, we're not skilled in everything, and we need to know what our limitations are. And for me, and I can only speak for myself, if you're not coming to me asking about a spiritual issue, if it's something that's having to deal with family relationships or financial relationships or addiction problems or any host of other issues, immigration issues, you name it. They don't teach me that at seminary. Okay. Marcia, you can pass that on to the seminary teachers, okay, so they can include that in the curriculum, and we extend the seminary year for another 5 years, okay? But we're not qualified for that. Know what your qualifications are. Now, sometimes we can give anecdotal advice, it may be something along the lines of finance, if you're particularly skilled in that area. Or you can give some anecdotal advice with regards to family issues if there's a spiritual connotation involved. Outside of that, boy, I tell you what, you should have a sheet of paper in your desk drawer with a whole list of referrals of qualified individuals that you could just whip out at a moment's notice. Maybe you have it on your phone and you can say, you know what, your issue, and this is one of the key things that you need to do, is affirming people of the importance of the issue that they're bringing to you. and you say, this issue is so important that I have to acknowledge to you that I am not fully qualified to help you with this, but I know somebody who is. And you pull out your phone, you hand off a phone number. You can help them in making the connections or whatever it is, but know that you're not the fixer of every problem that's out there in the church. And most people, for the most part, will recognize that, and they'll say, yeah, you're human just like everybody else. But what can a pastor do? Very good at listening, very good at reflecting back what we're hearing, very good at clarifying what you're telling me, very good at saying, you know what, this is what I think God could has to say based upon His word. You know, you can provide some passages, but limit yourself to what you can do professionally and credibly when somebody comes to you and asks for help.
And I think it's important that we keep one thing in mind. Advice given by the pastor can hold the pastor liable, or it might, right?
That's very right. And you got to, and on the flip side of that is the pastor has to communicate and should communicate that whatever you're telling me in this conversation here is going to be confidential unless you tell me that you're going to hurt yourself in some way. And that's sometimes where the lines get a little bit fuzzy. Or if you're planning to hurt somebody else or do something else that's illegal, that's where my boundaries for confidentiality, are drawn.
And I believe that would apply to all of us who are volunteers, right? That there's a boundary there, because except Esther in this panel, she's the only licensed clinician here. The rest of us, whatever advice we provide, counseling, we are all putting ourselves in a situation where we can, but you said I could do this, and now we become liable for those items. So Esther, what are the steps for making a proper referral to a counsel?
So the first thing I want to leave as a homework for all of you who are listening to us is, please, let's educate ourselves in regards to who is a psychologist, who is a clinician, who is a social worker, who's a case worker, because those are things in social work realm that comes interchangeably. And also for some places in the world, a psychiatrist is a psychologist and a psychologist is a clinician. Because they do some licensure different from what the United States holds. The other second thing I want to clarify is that when we're making the referral, the person needs to know that it's a crisis intervention. So we want you to see someone for crisis intervention. It's not that you're crazy. It's not that you are mala de los nervios, we say in Spanish, that your nerves are bad. This is a crisis intervention. This is something that is for you're overwhelmed with emotions and you have gone through something traumatic. You're gonna need some more of support of someone rather than me who wants to help. So the first thing that you can offer that person is to call with them to make the referral. The second thing you can offer to go with them to the first appointment if they want to. Sometimes the kids don't have a phone or they don't have access to certain things. So you can offer to make the referral for them, but they need to be available. But you also have to tell them that if they want to recount that referral, they can always do so. And you can continue to check in with them. Also offer to them to provide some general information if that's safer for them, or they can think that they can follow up later. But always check in with them and say, how are you doing today? Did you follow up with the referral? Call me back and let me know if you need anything, you need a ride or whatnot. So the first thing will be, hopefully as leaders, we do have, like the pastor said, resources available for us, or we can ask in the church as well. Any other clinicians or therapists or doctors that we know, if you for them to give you some local numbers as well, but we should have those on deck at all times. That will be my recommendation. But first of all, explain to them why are you referring them to this intervention, and just let them know that this is not for crazy people, that this is just crisis intervention, just for them to deal with what's happening in the moment.
And adding to what Esther is saying, I because I work in the social work field like she does, although I'm not licensed, but I work with providing support in the communities to the families. It's helpful to know that the psychiatrist here in the United States, it's not the first person you will see, because the psychiatrist is the one that will prescribe whatever medication you need to take, right? That's so you can differentiate A and B. Usually you will be able to meet first of all, either with a licensed social worker or with a psychologist, either or, right? And they will determine if you need to go for further treatment with a psychiatrist. So, and to help our families understand, because this division has a large array of people that come from different parts of the world, and we come with stigma, right? When they're saying you need to go see a counselor, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I have to go see the cuckoo doctor, and they're usually referring to the psychiatrist, which is the one that does the prescription, right? And that's not the case. The case is that we're sending you someone that is going to assess if we need to get to that particular level. I want to say thank you to this panel. I want to appreciate that they held on with me despite of the technical difficulties at the beginning, that I have taken 45 extra minutes of their time without asking, but they held on here and they were willing to come through this. We hope that those of you who are listening have gotten a better understanding of what tools you can have and use in order to be more effective helping navigate the needs of the populations that you're working with at your local church. For those asking, how do you meet the requirements of the honors? We have posted a link to a Google Doc where you will be completing a short assessment regardless to this. And there's some extra assignments that you will need to complete there. Those will need to be turned in to your mentor, and you will need to add those to your portfolio for proof of completion of this particular honor. If you have questions, the email is also posted on the comment section for you to reach out. I know before we close out, here there has been a couple of questions that were posted in the panel. And by the participants, some questions we answered, some questions we did not answer because they require the response of a professional counselor, and that was not the intent of this honor. So we will try our best to find people who are licensed clinicians that can give you specific answers to those questions. There's a question here that says, which one would have more resources for dealing with a non-mental health crisis? A psychologist, a licensed social worker, or a psychiatrist? And I would say in that case, most likely a social worker, because those are the ones that are out in the field, doing the work and ensuring that supports are being put in the communities for the families that don't. And if they understand that there's a mental health crisis within the family, they will make the referrals to the appropriate channels to provide those additional supports to the family. Can we retake the Google quiz? Just one time. We cannot do the Google quiz 5 or 6 times, right? If you guys didn't obtain a passing score with that. Thank you once again. I would like to ask Pastor Grady if you could please close with prayer tonight so we can go home. Thank you, audience. Pastor?
Yes. Father God, we're just so grateful that you provide resources and you equip us. You've given us some brains that we can use in helping to address times of crises. You put compassion in our hearts, and you give us a desire to be an extension of your grace to people. And so, Father, we thank you for allowing us to be extensions of your grace. And so I just ask a blessing upon each person who's participated in this panel tonight and those who are listening in. May we understand, Father, your goodness in the way that you treat each one of us, and may we be willing to pass on just a glimpse of that goodness as we interact with other people. So grant us all with your blessings and with good health is my prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.